Hey, welcome back to my channel. In this video, I'm going to show you how to build a farmhouse style table and bench using construction grade lumber from the home center, so stick around. Alright, in a future video I'm going to show you how to purchase boards from your home center. We're going to do a walkthrough and visually inspect the boards and show you the process that I go through in order to select the boards I'm going to use. I've already got these boards home, and so what we're going to do now is inspect them again, because I know some of them have a little bit of damage, some of them are cracked on the ends, and we want to identify those, because when I get ready to cut them down at the miter station, I want to make sure I cut off the bad areas, leaving myself with good solid wood to build a table from. So I'll take each board and I'll just start inspecting it here, and I see some cracks right here on this end, so I'm just going to identify these with a little circle and a mark, this one too, so that I can easily spot that later. I know I want to cut that part off the board, and down here I got a little spot on this end, so we're going to make sure that end gets cut off. The rest in the middle looks good. We'll do that for each board. Okay guys, I've inspected the wood and I know where the bad spots are, so I've identified that. Now it's time to go ahead and cut them down. We're not going to cut them to the final dimension just yet, because we want to be able to do that at the end after assembly of the tabletop. So this tabletop is going to be 78 inches long. I'm going to cut these boards down to about 82 inches or so. It does not have to be exact at this point. Okay, we got our boards cut to about 82 inches, so now we're going to lay them out and arrange them according to how things look. So I'll show you how that's done. Okay, so I've got the boards laid out, and the first thing I'm going to do is go back and inspect again and find out what side is the best side, because I want the best side facing up. Next, I'm going to look at the wood grain and how things look to make sure that things kind of match. You don't want to have a couple of boards with a lot of knots on one side of the table, and then on the other side of the table have a few boards that have very little knots. So you want to kind of equal that out as far as your knots go, and also just what the wood grain looks like. Try to match up the wood grain a little bit better. For instance, these two boards right here, they go together quite nicely, so they'll probably stay right there. Some boards will be very easy, because there'll be damage on one side, where the coloration is just really bad. And boards that are in pretty good shape, then it's a little harder to tie. Okay, so these are the sides that I want to use for the tabletop. This is what's going to be facing up. From here now I'm going to slide it together, and we're going to take a better look at the wood grain and make any adjustments. Okay, so it doesn't look like we have a lot of knots to work with. Actually, there's not too many knots in this wood at all, so that's a good thing. I like a few knots because it gives it that country rustic look, but too many knots can become a problem. Also, the wood grain is in pretty good shape too, so a lot of this wood grain, when we butt these boards together, they match quite well. This seems to be the odd duck right here. This one's a little different than the rest. So, wood grain on this side of the board. I'll see if it matches up with this one. And I think what I'm going to do is we're going to move this one over and stick it in the middle. Yeah, that's what we needed to do. This board here, it's got a little less wood grain, it's a little lighter in color, and so by placing it near the middle, it kind of equals out what the tabletop is going to look like. So with that, very little adjustment. Usually we do quite a bit of shuffling and spinning the wood around, trying to find just what works best. But this is actually in pretty good shape, so I'm going to give you a better look, and then we're going to go to the next step. All right, so now that we have the wood arranged the way we want it, we're going to label each board so we know in what order it's going to be in. Because by the time we get done cutting and shuffling and moving things around, things are going to get mixed up again. So when you buy the wood directly from the home center, it's already been dimensioned to size. That leaves you with a rounded edge on each side of the board. In order to properly join these boards up, we need to take this rounded edge off right here. So we're going to take it over to our table saw and we're going to trim each piece. If you don't do that, if you don't have a table saw, you can still put your boards together and join them like this, but then what happens is you get left with a groove right here in the center. And that's not ideal for kitchen tabletops, because then when you get ready to clean your table and you're wiping off the crumbs will fall into the groove. It's very annoying and hard to get cleaned out. So it's always best to trim your boards down, get rid of that rounded edge. That way when you put all your boards together, you end up with a nice, clean, smooth surface. Here in the woodworking garage, I use a small contractor style table saw. I just don't have the room for one of those big cabinet saws like some people have. But it does the job. It works very well for my needs. Okay, because of our boards are 5.5 inches wide, and we only want to take a little bit off of the rounded edge, what I'm going to do is I'm going to adjust my fence, and I'm going to take off just 3/16. So that is, one little line is a 1/16. So that would be 1, that's 2, and then that's 3. So that's all I'm going to take off on the rounded edge on one side of the board. When I flip the board around, I'm going to cut the other rounded edge off, and that's going to be 1, 2, 3 for another 3/16. Now if you notice there's an 1/8 of an inch left, that's actually going to be gone because that's the kerf area of the blade where the blade removes the wood when you cut it. So in the end, we're going to end up with a board that is exactly 5 inches. Okay guys, so here's a tip for you. When you're working with long boards and you're trying to rip them down on a small contractor style table saw like this one here, it's a little hard to feed the board through and keep it from getting all wiggle-jiggled with you. You know, it's a long board and it's dangling off the end of the edge of the table saw, and so it's easy for it to move and wiggle as you try to feed it through. So you kind of really need an extra set of hands, and that's where this little guy right here really comes in handy. It's a feather board from Miles Craft, and how it works, it has this attached miter bar, and it goes right into your miter slot on your table saw. So you put this into your table saw, and you can adjust it. And I'm going to use a scrap piece of wood here. So the table fence is already set to the width that we need it to be, so we know this is where the wood's going to be. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to press it up against that wood so it's nice and tight, and then I'm going to tighten down these thumb screws to hold it in place. Now it acts like an extra set of hands. Kind of jammed in there a little bit, but when you get ready to feed it through, it's going to feed through nice and smooth, and it helps keep your board pressed up against your fence, which is going to give you a straighter cut. Okay, another tip for you is when you're working with long boards and you're out here trying to feed it through your table saw, you know, it's really unstable and it's hard to get it pushed through. The feather board helps as an extra set of hands right here near the blade to keep it pushed up against the fence and keep everything nice and tight. But another thing I like to do is I like to use this roller stand here I got from Harbor Freight. I think I paid, it seems like it was $20 or so. I've got it set at a height, that's equal with the table saw. And so what I do is I'll just put my board on this roller stand, slide it into place, and it gives me an extra surface here. It helps me to keep the board stable as I start to feed it through, because I'm going to be feeding it through like this, pressing up against my fence, trying to keep everything nice and tight as we run the entire board through. And just having this here, it prevents me from having to adjust and keep up with the weight of the board that's sticking out back here behind me. Okay, the last step is to go ahead and put on your safety gear and we'll start ripping this board down. Okay, so we've cut one side of our board. Now we're going to adjust our table fence another 3/16, so that'd be 3 of the little lines. So that's 1, there's 2, right there. Now when we're done cutting the rounded edge off on the other side, we're going to be left with a 5-inch board. Okay, so we've trimmed off the rounded edges on each side of our board, so now we're going to lay it out and go from there. Show you the next step. Remember, we marked our boards, so it's easy for us now to put them back in the order in which we wanted to have them. Okay, let's stop for a second and talk about jointing your board. Jointing your board is when you take the edge of your board and you run it through a jointer, and it makes this edge right here perfectly smooth and straight. I recently got a jointer. In fact, we just got it last week and we haven't used it yet for the first time. But the problem is, it's a desktop jointer and it's only 31 inches long, and these boards are 84 inches long at the moment. And so things get a little lumpy, a little squirrely when you're trying to joint that edge and push the board through because of the length. In a woodworking garage like this, we don't have the space in order to have a full-size jointer. So I'm hoping this will help with some of the smaller projects that I have, but I'm just not able to use it for these large tabletops. However, having said that, the process in which we just went through, we still get really good results. The key there is when you purchase your wood, and we're going to talk about that in another video, when you purchase your wood, you have to make sure that you start with wood that is as straight as possible. When you bring it home, it's important that you use the wood right away. I bought this last evening, and here it is this morning. I'm working on this tabletop, putting it together. If it sits in your garage for more than a day, then the climate is going to change the board. It's going to start to warp and twist because the humidity changes inside your garage versus the environment that it was in inside the store. So when you purchase this wood, plan it out so that you plan to use it right away. Same day is best, but no later than the next day. Let me show you the result that we have just off of the table saw. Okay, so when we push our wood together, you can see we're getting a really nice tight fit in most places. There's going to be a couple places as you move along, and as I jiggle the camera around, there's going to be a few places like right here where, yeah, you have a little bit of a crack. So we know this board isn't perfectly straight. Either this one or this one is not perfectly straight, so we have a little bit of a gap here. Let's move along. The rest of these are looking good. Here's another area where we've got a little bit of a gap as you go along. But again, these gaps are really small, about a 1/16. This one's about an 1/8, but you know, we don't have it pushed together all the way either. So not bad at all for not having a jointer. When we get ready to make this tabletop and we put clamps on it and squeeze it together, you're not going to see these lines. Okay, so the next step in this process is we're going to go ahead and install some biscuits using our biscuit jointer. And to do that, we need to mark out our lines where those biscuits are going to be, and we'll get to that in a moment. So we've lined up the end of our table here, the end of our boards, so everything's fairly flush. Does not have to be exact, because remember, by the time it's done, we're going to go ahead and trim both ends of this, make everything nice and square. This process is a lot easier if you use a T-square, or some people call it the drywall square. And what I do is I plan on installing usually 3, for this one maybe 4. We'll go with 4 biscuits across each board. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to set up my square so I know I get a nice straight line. So what we're going to do now is we're just going to go ahead and mark a line across each board. So we have a line that intersects each of these boards, just like that. Okay, I've got to tell you, this biscuit joiner is a great tool. When I first started making these tabletops, I didn't have one. And so what I would do is the process you just saw, we rip our boards down, and I go right into the glue up stage where I put them in clamps, glue them up. And what would happen is the boards, after you started putting pressure and clamping on it, the boards would start to wiggle jiggle around just a little bit. And so the finished product would be, we'd have this tabletop and we'd have edges that would stick up a little bit higher in other areas. And it got to be really difficult to plane down and sand down by hand. Spent lots of hours sanding down tabletops because of board slippage. So once I learned about biscuit joiners and I tried it, man, I tell you what, there's no going back. So let me explain to you how that works. Okay, so remember those marks we just put on our boards? We're going to take our biscuit joiner, and on this biscuit joiner it has a line that we line up with the marks that we just put on the board. And in doing so, when we're operating it, it's going to push out this blade and it's going to cut us a slot right in the edge of the board. And I'll show you how that works. So we line it up right on our mark. We hold down on it so it's nice and stable. We pull the trigger and we just push it into the wood. And voila, we have a nice little slot in our board in which we can insert a biscuit. Now I'm going to go down this board and I'm going to cut the biscuit slots out. This is the first board on our table, so it's only going to get them on one side. We don't need anything on the outside edge of our table, right? So I'm going to put them only on this side, and all the other boards are going to get them on both sides. And then the last board again will only have biscuits on one side because it'll also have the outside edge of the table where we don't need them. So I'll take care of that now. Okay, so we got all of our biscuit slots cut, and the next step is to go ahead and lay out our clamps And we're going to get our boards into the clamps, and we're going to go ahead and start inserting biscuits and proceed with our glue up. And I'll show you what that looks like. Hey, most woodworkers have a different style clamp for their glue ups. They're more expensive, and let's just face it, some of us, we can't afford that. I found these to be very effective in clamping up my tabletops. These clamps are 4-way pressure clamps. They're made by Fulton. I found them on Amazon, and they were $50 for a set of 2. And I have 4 of them here that work out quite well. Watch along, and I'll show you how it works. Okay, with the top clamp removed, we're going to go ahead and start laying out our boards. Okay guys, we have our boards all laid out, and we're going to go ahead and install our biscuits. Now biscuits come in a variety of sizes. There's the larger size, which is a number 20. And we'll just add a little glue into each of these slots here, and we'll kind of force our cookie down into it, and we'll go from there. Alright, when doing this, it's important to note which way you flip your board, your very first board, because you want to make sure you have the cookie on the correct side. So in this case, we want to flip our boards up. If I flipped it this way, I'd be putting the cookie in on the wrong side of that board, and I'd get myself in trouble here in a few minutes. And a trick to keep up with that, just pay attention to where you have your marks. And for instance, the marks that we made earlier to cut these slots, they all face the same direction. So I flip this board up, and it faces this way, and each of my boards I will flip up in the same direction. Okay guys, this is where things really start coming together. We're going to be applying some Titebond 3 to the edge of these boards here. We're going to smear it out so we have a nice thick coat, and we want complete coverage. And then we're going to start assembling each of these boards, putting them on top, one on top of the other. Let's see how this works out. It also helps that before you get started, you have all the necessary tools close by. We're always losing something. All right, so we're gonna go tap in here, get this board lined up, start getting things aligned. See, having those biscuits in there really helps get these boards lined up, especially if something is a little warped and not quite straight. It really helps to get them lined up, and now we're not going to have to worry about these boards slipping and sliding around on top of this glue as we continue to add boards, and as we lay it down and then squeeze it all together. We're not going to have to worry about these things moving at all. So right now everything's looking real good. It doesn't go down and get seated in place with just a small tap. Something you're going to want to do, stick yourself a piece of scrap wood. That way we can hit it a little harder, get it seated, and you're not going to be damaging the surface right here. I'm going to do one more before we lay this down. If you get a dry spot, add more glue. You never have too much, but you can have too little. And to spread this around, I'm just using these little glue brushes here. Bought them on Amazon in bulk. They're pretty cheap, just a few cents each. All right, here we go. Alright, and what I'd like to do before I lay it down is go ahead and try to clean up a little bit of this glue. Just get the big stuff. It's going to be all sanded off. But when this glue dries in larger beads, it gets a little difficult to sand down and scrape off sometimes. No, we're just going to touch it up. Lay this down. Okay, we got our tabletop down flat, and now we need to go ahead and add the top clamp and start clamping things together. When I started this channel, I told myself that we would learn together, and when we made mistakes, we'd make mistakes together. I'd show you those mistakes and show you what to do, what not to do. And off camera, I made a mistake on this table, and I needed to correct it. Because the glue, we only have about 15 minutes of glue time to before things really set up. I had to work kind of quick. The camera was off. I didn't have time to be messing with the camera. I needed to hurry through the process and get things done. Remember when I told you when we were inserting those biscuits, make sure you get them inserted on the correct side? Well, I got down to the second to the last board and I realized that I didn't turn my board the correct way, and so when we were getting ready to put the boards together, I had biscuits sticking out on two boards that were supposed to be joined, which required me to pull the biscuits out of one side of the board. Well, I took about a 10-minute break after I installed those biscuits and they were already getting set in. I was having a hard time pulling them out to clean out the hole. What I ended up doing is taking pliers and breaking it off, and then I got my biscuit joiner out again and I cut the slots again to make them nice and clean, put the glue down, got the table glued back up. Now, part of the process I wanted to show you, but because of the expediency of time, I needed to get this in the clamps because the glue was drying. Again, I didn't turn on the camera, but I'll show you what needed to happen, and then I'm going to tell you what happened off camera where we had a serious accident. Okay, the way these clamps work, they clamp on this side of the clamp, and then you got notches on this bottom side here. And so when you tighten it from the other end, it draws the clamp together here and from the other side, as well as putting pressure down and pulling pressure up from the bottom. So you really get pressure from all four directions. And it's a really good system. It works well for me. When you get a tabletop inserted into your clamps, inevitably it's not going to always fit depending on the width of your tabletop. So you have to cut these little spacers out and shove them in here just so you have these little spacers to fill the distance between the open gap, the table and the clamp piece here. Alright, so in my rush, and when it comes to woodworking, you should never allow yourself to get stressed or rushed. In this case, the glue was drying and I needed to move kind of quickly. So I grabbed some 2x2 material, some scrap 2x2 material, and came over here to the miter station and started cutting out those small chunks like I just showed you to fill the gap. First and foremost, I forgot to put on my safety glasses. Secondly, I was over here and I was cutting a little quicker than I need to, and I got down to about my third cut, and what happened is my board came away from the fence just a little bit and I didn't realize it. I came down hard with my saw blade. It hit the piece of wood. The piece of wood slammed up against the fence and it exploded. Never before have I seen a piece of wood explode like this. I've heard of it happening. I've never seen it, never witnessed it, never had an accident like this in the shop. Standing there in front of the miter station, I saw a dust cloud, and it was a shotgun blast that came out. And I'm a Christian man, and I'll tell you right now, it was God or one of God's angels that was protecting me. Because I'm going to show you the wood pile of what's left of that piece of wood that came out around me. But I'm standing in front of that miter station, and there was the explosion, and there were pieces flying to the left and to the right, and even above my head. Best I can tell, nothing hit me. Let me show you the wood. Okay guys, it's the next day. My battery died, and I'd had enough of all the activity yesterday, and so here we are. I wanted to show you this wood that I've collected from around the shop. These are the items that went whizzing by my head. Some of these ended up on the left side, some of them ended up on the right side, and I tell you what, I am truly blessed because of any number of these pieces right here could have smacked me in the head, hit me in the eye, hit me in the face. It was really a boneheaded move on my part yesterday, and I learned from it, and I hope you learned from it too. It's just an unfortunate thing, and I'm thankful that I didn't get hurt. So don't do what I did. Okay, it's a new day in the workshop, and today we're going to remove these clamps, take a good look at this tabletop, see how it turned out, start scraping off the glue and sanding it down, so stick around. Okay, off camera I put away my clamps and cleaned up all the paper that was underneath, and now we're looking at the tabletop. It looks to be in pretty good shape. I don't see any visible gaps or cracks in the wood, so everything clamped up nicely. It is mostly smooth all over with the exception of all the glue, but the tabletop is relatively flat, so I'm real pleased with that. The next step is we're going to scrape off all the beaded up glue that you see here. So we're going to scrape all of our glue joints and get all that excess glue off, and then we'll proceed with sanding. To take this glue off, the easiest way I've found is to get you one of these scrapers right here from the home center. It's just a paint scraper with a carbide blade on the front, and it allows you to kind of get in there and really scrape off the glue. Just like that. So that's what we're going to do, and then we'll proceed with sanding. Okay, so we've sanded from 60 grit to 120 grit. That's as far as we're going to go at the moment. It's time to go ahead and trim this table up. The table is going to be 78 inches overall length. We're going to cut it down to 68 inches because I'm going to add a 5-inch breadboard end on either side to make it 78 total. So let's cut it now. I like using this drywall T-square for getting my straight cuts. We're going to cut this end. At 78. And then we'll flip it around and cut the other end at 68. Okay, I don't have a track saw, but I made this jig to make it much easier to cut a straight line. It acts similar to a track saw. All we have to do is line it up with our pencil mark. And I'll give you a closer look in just a second. I'll show you what that looks like. You can see our pencil mark in there. And what we do is we just line our track up on the edge of that pencil mark where we're going to cut. And we're going to make our cut right along that edge, all the way down. Nice smooth edge right here, nice and straight. It's going to be great for our breadboard end. If you use a piece of scrap wood and a small clamp, you can clamp it right here to the edge of your table, and it provides a place for you to lay your breadboard end down. You do that on both sides. Now we can take our breadboard in, lay it here, and do a test fit. We're going to be using these 1/2-inch oak dowels to attach our breadboard to our table, and I'll show you how it's done. The next step is to find the center of your board, and you're going to want to make a line from your board to your breadboard end, right in the center of each board. This is where we're going to draw the holes for our dowels. Okay, to drill the holes, I'm using this self-centering dowel jig. It allows for multiple size dowels. We're going to use the largest one, which is a 1/2 inch. It's simple to use. You slip it over the wood and simply tighten it down. It squeezes from both sides, so it automatically finds the center of your board, which is where we want to place our holes. Okay, using the mark on the board that we already placed, we're going to line that with the mark for the 1/2 inch hole on this doweling jig. So we're going to slip this on, line up our mark so we know exactly where it's going to go, tighten it down, and we're ready to drill our hole. Before drilling your first hole, you may want to test this out on a scrap piece of wood. Not all drill bits are going to drill a nice clean hole. I've got a couple of different drill bits, and this is the one I prefer to use because it drills out a pretty clean hole, but more importantly, the dowel fits nice and snug. Now, sometimes this is a little tight and it's hard to get off, so I prefer to just use a little wrench to loosen it up. Slide it over to the next mark, line everything up, and tighten it back down. Okay, so we've already drilled our holes on the table, and now it's time for us to drill the holes into our breadboard end. You've probably already learned about seasonal wood movement and the need to allow for the tabletop to expand and contract. To be able to do that, the dowels that are sticking out of our breadboard or out of our table side need to be able to wiggle and move inside the breadboard end. And to do that, we're going to have to make this hole oblong, a little wider. Now don't get tempted and simply grab a larger drill bit and make a bigger hole, because the problem is going to be that your dowel isn't going to be tight and fit snugly this direction. It's going to be loose all the way around. By making an oblong hole into our breadboard end, the dowel is still going to be tight back and forth this direction, but it's still going to allow for movement this direction. So we're still going to be using our doweling jig, but what we're going to do is we're going to find the mark on our board and the mark on the doweling jig, and this time we're not going to center it. We're going to offset our doweling jig maybe about 1/8 of an inch to the left, and we're going to drill a hole. And then we're going to move it about 1/8 of an inch to the right of that line and drill another hole, so that our hole still ends up being the same depth, same height, but it's going to be a little bit longer, or oblong. Oblong? Is that the word? Leave me a comment in the description below. To make this step easier, I'm just going to carry my mark to the edge side of the board. So I'm going to bring it around the corner so we can see it just a little bit better. Now we have a hole that is going to allow for movement side to side, just like that. Okay, there you have it. An effective mortise that's going to allow for movement of our dowel, which acts as our tenon, and it should prevent us from having any issues. Okay, here's an important tip for you. Make sure you get all the sawdust out of the holes, because it can become packed down at the bottom, and it's going to affect things when we get ready to start cutting our dowels. So I like taking a screwdriver, just running around in there, making sure there's nothing still stuck or caked to the side, loose on the bottom, and getting it all out. Next step is we want to go ahead and start cutting our dowels. And to do that, what I like to do is I like to measure my holes just to be sure I know where I'm at. We know that each of our holes were drilled slightly a little different from the other as far as the depth. So somewhere between 2 1/4 and 2 1/2. So what I like to do is I'll just drop something down in a hole and mark it with my thumb, so I know that's how deep that hole is right there. And I can go down. That one is not as deep. So this is going to be my shorter hole. So I move my thumb. Those are fine. Those are fine. Oh, that one's really deep. That's fine. So I do have one hole here. Actually, I have 2 holes here that are a little shallow, but that's where we're going to be right there. So I measure that so I know about where I'm going to be, and that is 2 1/4. You want to give yourself about 1/8 of an inch room at the bottom for glue. What you don't want to do is fill up your hole with glue and then shove your dowel in there and the glue doesn't have anywhere to go and expand, because it can crack your wood. Okay, it can split. The wood is weak in an area. You're going to know it. But for right here, we're going to make all of these 2 1/4. And now I'm going to check this side on the table and see where we're at, just to make sure we're about the same there. And that one's a little shallow. Those are fine. So this is my shallow one right here. And it is also right at 2. So we're looking at about 4 1/4 for our dowels. 4 1/4 will give us enough room to insert our dowels and get our breadboard pushed on. Okay, now that we have our dowels cut, I have a tip for you. I like to take my dowel and find the center and put a mark on it for each one. It makes it easier when you're getting ready to install your dowels into your board and you're hammering them in to know about where the center line is. Okay, so we're going to be adding glue to one side of our dowel before hammering it into place on the table side, not the breadboard side. This is the table side we're working on. And how I like to do that is I just like taking a piece of scrap wood, put me a glob of glue out there, glob of glue, say that real fast. Take my dowel and just kind of run it through the glue. And then take my hammer and start to pound it in. Sometimes you'll get a dowel that for whatever reason it's just really tight and it's not going to go in all the way. Don't force it because you'll end up splitting your wood. That is a nice tight joint. It's not going anywhere, so we're going to leave it. And what we'll do is we'll come back later and we'll trim if we have to. We'll trim each of our dowels. Okay, so as you can see, we've got our dowels installed, and there are a couple of them that extend out further than what I'd like. They just did not go in all the way. But I didn't want to force it and risk ruining the tabletop. So what we're going to do now is take something where you can measure the depth of the hole and go ahead and drop it in there. Mark the depth of your hole, and then you can check how long your dowel is. So that hole, or excuse me, that dowel is going to be about 1/8 of an inch or so too long. So I'm going to go ahead and put a mark here. If I don't drop my pencil. I'm going to go ahead and put a mark here and maybe give myself another 1/8 inch wiggle room at the bottom. So we're just going to mark it like that. And I'm going to check each hole. So there's my depth. And that one, we got plenty of room. I'm going to move over to this one here, if you can see it in the camera. Check my depth. That's how deep this hole is. We're going to check it here. And again, we're right there. This dowel is going to be just about 1/8 or so too long, so we're going to trim it down to maybe make it 1/4 to give ourselves a little wiggle room. So we have room for glue. Go back, check every one of these. Plenty there. Plenty of room there. Plenty of room there. More than enough room there. And the last one is good. So the rest of these here, we have plenty of room, but we are going to have to come back with a saw and trim those. Okay, you can use whatever saw you have available to you to trim these up. I have this flush trim saw and it works very well, so that's what I'm going to do. Now if you want to, you can go back, double check your depth again. There's my hole depth, and there's where my dowel is, and I have a little over 1/8 of an inch space. Hey, did you guys catch that mistake? Man, why didn't someone stop me? Well, it wouldn't be much of a training video if I only showed you what to do and I never showed you what not to do. And here in the woodworking garage, we make mistakes. And when I do, I'm going to show you. When I was drilling our holes in our breadboard end, I forgot an important step, which is to find my center hole. And in this case, there's going to be 9 holes. So I'm going to take my center 2, and there's going to be 3 holes on either side. These 2 center holes need to be the exact size. They're not going to be oblong because we want our dowel to fit tightly into these 2 joints. This is what secures the breadboard end up against the table. They're going to be a tight joint, Going to be glue in both of them, whereas the other additional holes to either side, they're going to be the oblong hole, and they're going to be loose fitting that allows for the wood movement and allows for the table to swell and to shrink. But these two center holes, it needs to be a tight joint, so they should not be oblong. It should be the same diameter as our dowel. Okay, so I'm going to make that correction right now. I've already got a new board cut, and we're going to knock this out. So it's probably helpful when you mark your holes to go ahead and find your two center holes and make yourself a note of some sort so you know not to make those oblong. And in my case, I'm going to go ahead and drill these first, because otherwise I'll forget. So we're going to line that up. It needs to be perfectly on your line. It needs to be perfectly centered. Tighten it down, drill our hole. Okay, so here's an example of our center joint, which is going to be nice and tight, versus our oblong hole, which is going to allow for our movement of the wood dowel. Okay, for this next step, we're going to be applying a little bit of glue into our two center holes and on our dowels, and then we're going to put this breadboard on. Okay, if you don't have a clamp that goes all the way across, you can clamp this and make it nice and tight. What I use is I just take some scrap wood like this, and I make my own little clamp. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put one right here on the end, one on the other end, and use the clamps that I do have. Tighten them down. And they work pretty good. Okay, you're not going to get a perfect joint without jointing your boards, but as you can see, it's pretty close. Now once we get done sanding this, it's going to look even better. With the breadboard ends installed, next we're going to give this table a rounded edge. Okay, our breadboards are done. They're attached, they're sanded down, and we just gave our whole tabletop a rounded edge profile, and here's the finished product. Hey, I hope you enjoyed this video on this farmhouse style tabletop build. We'll be uploading another video real soon on the construction of the table base. I appreciate you watching this video and your support. If you learned just one thing in this video, please like it. For every time someone likes this video, YouTube shows it to someone else, and that's how we grow this channel. Also, please consider subscribing. And if you hit the bell icon, you'll be notified every time I upload a new video.